The silence stretched like a rope about to snap. Boone felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes studying him, measuring him against some invisible standard he didn't understand. The trunk by the door seemed to mock him, a reminder that whatever game he thought he was playing had rules he'd never learned. "I'm not like most men," he said finally, though the words felt foreign in his mouth. He'd spent the last month imagining this moment, rehearsing conversations with the beautiful Ruby he'd glimpsed from across that dusty street. Never once had he pictured standing here, unable to tell which woman was the object of his carefully planned pursuit. The father nodded slowly, but his expression remained unreadable. "We'll see about that. Mr. Carter, come inside." As they moved toward the house, Boone caught himself studying the women more carefully. The one on the left moved with fluid grace, like she was dancing to music only she could hear. Her sister walked with purpose, each step deliberate and strong. Both beautiful, both captivating, but in ways that made his head spin with confusion. "You rode a long way," the purposeful one said, falling into step beside him. "What exactly did you hear about our family that brought you here?" There was something in her voice, a challenge wrapped in curiosity. Boone found himself drawn to the directness of it, so different from the coy games most women played. "I heard Ruby was the most beautiful woman in 3 counties, he admitted, then immediately regretted his honesty. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "And what makes you think beauty is enough reason to travel 200 miles? Before he could answer, her sister appeared on his other side. "Clarabel, don't interrogate the poor man before he's even had water for his horse." Clarabel. So the direct one was Clarabel, which meant the graceful one was Ruby. But as soon as he thought he had it figured out, Ruby shot her sister a look that was anything but gentle, and Clarabel's response carried a steel that contradicted her name. They reached the porch, and the father gestured to chairs arranged in a careful semicircle. "Sit, Mr. Carter. If you're serious about courting one of my daughters, you need to understand what that means." Boone settled into a chair, hyper-aware of how both women positioned themselves, not across from him but on either side, like they were presenting a united front against an invasion. "The rule exists for a reason," the father continued. "These girls have been inseparable since birth. Hurt one, you hurt both. Choose one, the other feels abandoned. Any man who wants to be part of this family accepts that he's not getting a wife. He's joining something bigger." As the words sank in, Boone noticed Ruby's hands fidgeting with the fabric of her dress. She kept glancing toward the packed trunk, and something in her expression made his chest tighten with unease. "What if one of them doesn't want to be chosen?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Ruby's hands stilled completely, and Clarabel's sharp intake of breath was the only sound, until Ruby stood abruptly. "I think," Ruby said, her voice carefully controlled, "Mr. Carter deserves to know the truth before he makes any decisions he might regret." Ruby's words cut through the afternoon heat, like a blade through silk. Clarabel shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the wooden porch. "Ruby, don't." But Ruby was already moving toward the trunk, her decision made. "He came all this way thinking he knew what he wanted. The least we can do is be honest about what he's actually getting." Boone felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't how courtship was supposed to go. There should have been pleasantries, careful conversations, gradual revelations. Instead, he was watching something fracture in real time, and he didn't understand the pieces well enough to stop it. "The truth, Mr. Carter," Ruby said, her hand resting on the trunk's worn leather, "is that your timing is remarkable. You arrived just in time to watch everything you think you want disappear." Clarabel stepped between them, and for the first time, Boone saw real anger flash across her features. It transformed her face completely, revealing a passionate intensity that made his breath catch. "This isn't fair to him," Clarabel said, her voice low and fierce. "You made your choice weeks ago. Don't use him as an excuse to make it dramatic." The accusation hung in the air, and Boone found himself studying Clarabel's profile as she faced her sister. The angle of her jaw was stubborn, determined. The way she held herself suggested someone used to fighting battles others couldn't see. "What choice?" he asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Ruby smiled, but it was edged with something that might have been sadness or relief. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning. There's a teaching position in California that I've accepted. I wrote to them 3 weeks ago." The father's chair creaked as he leaned back, and Boone realized this wasn't news to him. This was a family drama he'd walked into the middle of, not a simple courtship. So you see, Ruby continued, you can't court me because I won't be here to court. Which leaves you with an interesting problem. Boone looked between the sisters, trying to process what he was hearing. The rule about accepting both still stands, Clarabel said quietly. Even if there's only one of us left. The way she said it made Boone's chest tighten. There was hurt there, carefully hidden, but unmistakable. She wasn't just losing a suitor she'd never wanted. She was losing her sister. I don't understand, Boone said. Why did you let me come here if you knew? Ruby's composure cracked slightly. Because Clarabel asked me to. She thought you deserved a chance to make an informed decision. About what? Clarabel turned to face him fully, and the directness of her gaze was almost overwhelming. About whether you came here for the idea of Ruby, or for something real. About whether you're the kind of man who runs when things get complicated. The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, but underneath it was something else. Vulnerability, maybe, or hope. Boone found himself leaning forward, drawn by the complex emotions playing across her features. And if I stay? He asked. Then you get to discover what it's really like to be part of this family, she said, with all the complications that come with it. The afternoon sun was starting to slant lower, casting long shadows across the porch. In the distance, cattle lowed as they moved toward water, a reminder that life continued its rhythm, regardless of human drama. Ruby moved toward the house, her decision clearly final. I'll leave you two to figure out what comes next. I have packing to finish. As her footsteps faded into the house, Boone found himself alone with Clarabel and her father. The silence felt different now, charged with possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Clarabel sat back down, but perched on the edge of her chair like she might bolt at any moment. So, Mr. Carter, she said, and there was something almost playful in her tone despite the gravity of the situation. Still think you know what you came here for? The question lingered between them like heat rising from sun-baked earth. Boone studied Clarabel's face, searching for answers in the curve of her smile and the way shadows played across her features. She was beautiful. He could see that now, without Ruby's presence clouding his judgment. But it was a different kind of beauty, one that seemed to deepen the longer he looked. Honestly, he said, I'm starting to think I never knew what I came here for. Her father stood abruptly, brushing dust from his pants. I'll leave you two to talk. Clarabel, show him around the property. If he's staying for supper, he might as well understand what kind of life we live here. As his footsteps faded toward the barn, Clarabel rose and gestured toward a path that led behind the house. Come on then. Let's see if you're as sturdy as you look. They walked in silence at first, their boots crunching on the dry grass. Boone found himself stealing glances at her profile, noting the determined set of her jaw and the way her hair caught the afternoon light. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. Ruby's been planning to leave for months, she said. The teaching position was just an excuse. An excuse for what? Clarabel stopped beside a wooden fence that enclosed a small corral where horses moved lazily in the shade. She gripped the top rail with both hands, and Boone noticed how her knuckles whitened with tension, for not having to choose between the life she wants and the life everyone expects her to want. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Boone stepped closer, close enough to catch the scent of lavender in her hair and see the fine lines of worry around her eyes. What kind of life does she want? Freedom, Clarabel said simply. Adventure, the chance to be someone other than half of a matched set. She turned to face him, and the raw honesty in her expression made his chest tighten. Ruby never wanted to be courted by men who saw her as a prize to be won. She wanted to choose her own path. And you? The question slipped out before he could stop it, more personal than he'd intended. Clarabel's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as if she was trying to read something written in a language she didn't quite understand. I wanted to keep my sister, she said, but I can't make someone stay who's determined to go. They stood close enough now that he could see flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could notice how her breathing had quickened. The air between them felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. That's not what I meant, he said quietly. She knew exactly what he meant. He could see it in the way her lips parted slightly, in the way she didn't step back despite their proximity. I want, she said carefully, to be seen for who I am, not as a consolation prize or a replacement for what someone else thought they wanted. The words hit him like a physical blow. Is that what he was doing? Settling for the sister who remained because the one he'd planned to pursue was leaving? But as he looked at Clarabel, really looked at her, He realized that wasn't what was happening at all. This woman standing before him, challenging him with her directness and her pain and her strength, wasn't a consolation prize. She was something he hadn't even known he was looking for. A shout from the house broke the moment. Ruby appeared on the back porch holding a piece of paper. "Clarabel," she called. "The stage arrives earlier than expected. I have to leave tonight." The color drained from Clarabel's face, and Boone felt something shift fundamentally in the space between them. Time was running out, and decisions that had seemed theoretical moments ago suddenly demanded immediate answers. Clarabel's hand flew to her throat, as if the words had physically struck her. "Tonight?" she whispered, then louder. "Tonight? But you said morning. You said we'd have time to—" Her voice broke on the last word, and Boone watched something crumble in her expression. All the careful composure she'd maintained throughout the afternoon shattered like glass hitting stone. Ruby disappeared back into the house without another word, leaving them standing in the sudden silence. Clarabel turned away from him, her shoulders rigid with the effort of holding herself together. "Hey," Boone said gently, reaching out to touch her arm. The contact sent a jolt through him. Her skin was warm beneath the thin fabric of her sleeve, and he could feel her trembling. "Clarabel, look at me." She shook her head, refusing to turn around. "You should go," she said, her voice muffled. "There's no point in staying now. You came here for Ruby, and she's leaving. The whole situation is complicated," he finished, stepping around to face her. "You said that before, about whether I was the kind of man who runs when things get complicated." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she lifted her chin with stubborn pride. "Are you?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning beyond the words. Boone found himself studying every detail of her face, the curve of her cheekbones, the defiant set of her mouth, the way she fought against showing vulnerability, even as tears threatened to spill. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've never been tested like this before." Something in his tone made her really look at him then, searching his face for deception or false comfort. What she found there seemed to surprise her. "What are you saying?" Boone stepped closer, close enough that the space between them felt intimate despite the open sky above. "I'm saying that maybe I came here for the wrong reasons, but that doesn't mean I should leave for the wrong reasons too." "You don't know me," she protested, but her voice had lost its conviction. "A few hours of conversation doesn't mean anything. You're feeling sorry for me because I'm losing my sister. Is that what you think this is?" He reached up, gently touching her cheek with the backs of his fingers. She didn't pull away. "Pity? What else could it be?" The vulnerability in her voice broke something open in his chest. "Clarabel, in the past 3 hours, you've challenged every assumption I had about what I wanted in a woman. You're direct when other women play games. You're strong when others pretend to be helpless. You see right through pretense to what's real." Her breath hitched. "Boone, I came here thinking I knew exactly what I was looking for," he continued, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "But what I found was something I didn't even know I needed." The sound of footsteps on gravel made them spring apart. Ruby emerged from the house carrying a traveling bag, her father behind her with the larger trunk. The moment of intimacy shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of impending goodbye. "The stage stops here in 2 hours, Ruby announced, her voice carefully neutral. "Just enough time for a last family supper." Clarabel wiped her eyes quickly, transforming back into the composed woman who had first greeted him on the porch. But Boone had seen beneath that surface now, had felt the tremor in her voice and the warmth of her skin. The knowledge changed everything. "I should help with supper," Clarabel said, moving toward the house. "Clarabel," Ruby called softly. Her sister stopped but didn't turn around. "After supper, I need to tell you something, about why I'm really leaving." The sisters looked at each other across the yard, and Boone sensed currents of communication he couldn't interpret. Whatever Ruby needed to say, it was important enough to risk missing her stage. As they all moved toward the house, Boone realized that everything he thought he understood about this family was about to change again, and whatever Ruby revealed might determine whether Clarabel would even want him to stay. If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a good Western tale, and subscribe to the Western Redemption channel. Every single day at exactly 10 a.m., a brand new story drops, packed with emotion, justice, and redemption. So turn on the notification bell, and don't miss the next chapter, because out here in the West, no one waits around. Supper felt like a funeral, where the corpse kept passing the salt. Clarabel picked at her food, while Ruby maintained a steady stream of cheerful conversation that fooled no one. Their father ate in silence, his jaw working methodically as if each bite required concentrated effort. Boone found himself watching the interplay of emotions around the table: grief, determination, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "The chicken's delicious," Ruby said brightly, cutting another piece. "Clarabel always was the better cook." "Stop," Clarabel said quietly. "Stop what?" "Stop pretending this is normal. Stop acting like you're going on a pleasant trip instead of abandoning everything you've ever known." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Ruby set down her fork carefully, and Boone saw her mask slip for the first time since he'd arrived. "I'm not abandoning anything," Ruby said. "I'm choosing something." "What's the difference?" Their father cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Clarabel said, her voice stronger now. "Mr. Carter might as well hear this. If he's going to be part of this family, he should understand what he's getting into." The casual way she said, "part of this family," made Boone's chest tighten with something that might have been hope. She was thinking beyond tonight, beyond Ruby's departure. She was considering a future that included him. Ruby stood abruptly and moved to the window, her silhouette stark against the fading daylight. "The teaching position isn't why I'm leaving," she said without turning around. The admission settled over the room like dust after a windstorm. Clarabel went very still, and Boone sensed they were finally approaching the truth that had been circling them all day. "Then why?" Clarabel asked. Ruby's reflection in the window glass looked haunted. "Because I met someone." The words hit Clarabel like a physical blow. Boone watched color drain from her face as understanding dawned. "Who?" Clarabel whispered. "David Morrison, the banker's son from town. We've been corresponding for months." Their father's chair scraped against the floor as he leaned back heavily. "Ruby, he asked me to marry him 3 weeks ago," Ruby continued, her voice gaining strength. "But he lives in California now. He has business interests there, a life he's built. If I want to be with him, I have to leave everything here behind." Clarabel stood so quickly her chair nearly toppled. "And you didn't think to tell me? To discuss it with your family?" What was there to discuss? Ruby turned from the window, and Boone could see tears on her cheeks. "You would have tried to talk me out of it. Father would have forbidden it, and I would have listened because that's what I always do. Put everyone else's needs before my own." "That's not fair," Clarabel protested. "Isn't it?" Ruby's voice cracked. "Do you know how many men have courted our family over the years? How many times I've stood beside you smiling and nodding while they tried to figure out which one of us they really wanted? How many times I've felt like half a person instead of a whole one?" The raw pain in her voice made Boone's throat tighten. He was witnessing something deeply private, the fracturing of a bond he was only beginning to understand. "I love you, Clarabel," Ruby continued, "but I can't keep living as your other half. I need to find out who I am when I'm just Ruby, not Ruby and Clarabel." Clarabel sank back into her chair, her face pale with shock and hurt. "So you're choosing him over us?" "I'm choosing myself," Ruby said firmly, "for the first time in my life." Outside, the sound of approaching horses signaled the stage's early arrival. Time was up, and the truth lay bare between them like a wound that wouldn't heal. The stage driver's voice carried through the evening air like a death knell. "Stage for California. All aboard." Ruby moved with sudden efficiency, gathering her belongings while Clarabel sat frozen at the table. Boone felt like an intruder witnessing something too intimate for outsider eyes, but leaving now would somehow make everything worse. "Clarabel," Ruby said, kneeling beside her sister's chair. "Please look at me." Clarabel's eyes, when she finally raised them, were bright with unshed tears, and something harder to define. Betrayal, maybe, or the particular pain that comes from learning someone you thought you knew completely had been living a secret life. "How long?" Clarabel asked. "How long have you been planning this?" "The letters started 6 months ago," Ruby admitted. "But I didn't make the decision until he proposed." 6 months. Clarabel's voice was flat, emotionless. 6 months of watching me worry about us growing old together on this ranch, unmarried and alone, while you knew you had another choice. Ruby flinched. "I wanted to tell you, but I knew you'd try to change my mind, and I was afraid you might succeed." Their father appeared in the doorway. Ruby's trunk balanced on his shoulder. His face was carefully neutral, but Boone caught the tightness around his eyes. Time to go, Ruby, he said quietly. Ruby stood and pulled Clarabel into a fierce embrace. I love you, she whispered. That will never change, but I have to do this. Clarabel remained rigid in her sister's arms for a moment, then melted into the hug with a sob that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. They held each other like drowning women clinging to driftwood, and Boone had to look away from the intensity of their pain. Take care of her, Ruby said over Clarabel's shoulder, and it took Boone a moment to realize she was speaking to him. The request hit him like a punch to the gut. Ruby was entrusting him with something precious but also assuming he would stay. The weight of that assumption and everything it implied made his head spin. Ruby, Clarabel said, pulling back from the embrace. What if this David Morrison isn't what you think he is? What if you get to California and realize you've made a terrible mistake? Ruby smiled through her tears. Then I'll have learned something about myself. But at least I'll know I tried. The stage driver called again, more impatiently this time. Ruby kissed her father's cheek, squeezed Clarabel's hand one last time, and walked toward the door with her shoulders squared against the weight of her decision. Boone found himself standing as she passed, caught between wanting to comfort Clarabel and feeling he should somehow honor Ruby's departure. Mr. Carter, Ruby said, pausing beside him, I hope you understand now why the rule about accepting both was so important to our father. We've never learned how to be separate people. Clarabel is going to need time to figure out who she is without me. Before he could respond, she was gone, her footsteps echoing across the porch and down to where the stage waited. Through the window, Boone watched her climb inside without looking back. The driver cracked his whip, and the stage lurched into motion, carrying Ruby away from everything she'd ever known. Clarabel stood slowly and walked to the window, her hand pressed against the glass as the stage disappeared into the gathering darkness. The silence in the room felt heavy and final. She's really gone, Clarabel whispered. Boone moved to stand behind her, close enough to offer comfort without presuming too much. She made her choice. And now I have to make mine, Clarabel said, turning to face him. In the lamplight, her eyes looked enormous and vulnerable. The question is, Mr. Carter, what choice are you going to make? The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Boone looked into Clarabel's eyes and saw his future reflected there. Not the one he'd planned when he rode up to this house, but something deeper and more real than anything he'd ever imagined wanting. I'm choosing to stay, he said quietly, if you'll have me. The relief that washed across her face was so profound it took his breath away. She had been preparing herself for abandonment, he realized, steeling herself against another loss. Why? She asked. And there was no coquetry in the question, no fishing for compliments. She genuinely needed to understand. Boone stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to catch the scent of lavender in her hair. Because somewhere between this morning and right now, I stopped trying to figure out which sister I was supposed to want and started paying attention to the woman standing in front of me. Clarabel's breath caught. And what did you see? Strength, he said without hesitation. Intelligence, the kind of beauty that grows stronger the longer you look at it. He reached up to touch her cheek gently, and someone brave enough to challenge a stranger about his motives instead of just accepting whatever he claimed to offer. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I don't know how to be myself without Ruby. We've been a pair for so long I'm not sure who Clarabel is when she's just Clarabel. Then we'll figure it out together, Boone said. I came here thinking I knew exactly what I wanted, and you've shown me I didn't know anything. Maybe we can both learn something new. Their father's footsteps on the porch broke the moment. He appeared in the doorway, looking older than he had that morning, worn down by the evening's emotional weight. Mr. Carter, he said, I assume you'll be staying the night. If that's acceptable, sir, and if it's all right with you, I'd like to stay longer than that. The older man studied Boone's face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him. The spare room is prepared, he said. We can discuss arrangements in the morning. As her father disappeared back into the house, Clarabel moved to the window where Ruby had stood earlier. But instead of watching something disappear into the distance, she seemed to be looking at the familiar landscape with new eyes. It's strange, she said. This place looks the same, but everything feels different. Boone joined her at the window, their shoulders touching. Different how? Quieter, more possible somehow. She turned to face him, and there was something new in her expression. Tentative hope, mixed with genuine curiosity. Tell me about your ranch. What's it like? As Boone began describing his property, his plans, his dreams for the future, he watched Clarabel's face come alive with interest. She asked intelligent questions about water rights and cattle breeding, about the practical realities of running a spread that size. Her engagement was genuine, not the polite interest of a woman trying to please a suitor. "You know," she said when he finished, "I've always wanted to see how other ranches operate. Ruby never had much interest in the business side of things, but I've been helping Father with the books for years." "You could visit," Boone suggested, then caught himself. "I mean, when you're ready, when things are more settled between us." Clarabel smiled, and it was the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her all day. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." Outside, night had fully settled over the ranch, but inside the house, something new was beginning, something that belonged entirely to them. 6 months later, Clarabel stood at the altar of the small church, but she wasn't the same woman who had watched her sister disappear into the California night. The transformation was evident in everything: the confident way she held herself, the direct gaze she fixed on Boone as he waited for her at the front of the church, the smile that belonged entirely to her, and not to half of a matched pair. She had discovered, in the months following Ruby's departure, that she was not the quiet, careful sister she had always believed herself to be. Without Ruby's vibrant personality to contrast against, Clarabel had found her own voice: sharp, intelligent, occasionally fierce, and completely captivating. Boone had courted her properly, spending weeks traveling between his ranch and hers, learning the rhythms of her daily life. He had watched her take over the ranch's business operations with skill that impressed neighboring ranchers. He had seen her comfort grieving neighbors, negotiate cattle prices with shrewd determination, and transform from someone who defined herself in relation to others into someone who stood confidently alone. Most importantly, he had learned that loving Clarabel meant loving someone who challenged him daily, who saw through any attempt at false charm, and who had built something real and lasting between them based on mutual respect rather than desperate need. As the preacher spoke the familiar words, Boone reflected on how completely wrong his original assumptions had been. He had come here seeking a beautiful wife to complement his successful ranch. Instead, he had found a partner who made him want to be better than he had ever thought to become. "Do you, Boone Carter, take Clarabel to be your wife?" "I do," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "And do you, Clarabel, take Boone to be your husband?" "I do," she replied, her voice strong and clear, carrying none of the uncertainty that had marked her words 6 months ago. When the preacher pronounced them married, their kiss was met with enthusiastic applause from the assembled guests. Clarabel's father beamed from the front row, looking more content than he had since Ruby's departure. Later, at the reception held in the church hall, Clarabel pulled Boone aside as they watched neighbors dancing and celebrating. "I got a letter from Ruby yesterday," she said. Boone felt a moment of concern. Would news from her sister diminish Clarabel's happiness on their wedding day? "She's married now, too," Clarabel continued, "to her David Morrison. She says California suits her, and she's teaching at a school for girls in San Francisco." "Are you all right?" Boone asked, studying her expression. Clarabel smiled, and there was genuine contentment in it. "I'm better than all right. I'm happy for her, and I'm happy for us." She looked around the hall, taking in the celebration, then back at him. "You know what's funny? I spent so many years afraid of being left behind. I never realized I might actually prefer to be the one who stays. And now I know exactly who I am," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him again. "I'm Clarabel Carter, and I'm exactly where I belong." As the evening wore on and they prepared to leave for Boone's ranch, their ranch now, Clarabel felt a deep satisfaction settle in her chest. She had not been chosen as a consolation prize or accepted as part of a package deal. She had been pursued, courted, and won by a man who saw her clearly and loved what he found. The rule about accepting both sisters had served its purpose in the end, though not in the way anyone had expected. It had forced Boone to look beyond surface attraction and discover something deeper. It had given Clarabel time to reveal her true self, and it had protected them both from a marriage built on illusion rather than reality. As their wagon pulled away from the church heading toward their new life together, Clarabel didn't look back. She had learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for the people you love is to let them go find themselves. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, letting go makes room for something even better to find you. The rule about accepting both had taught them all something valuable. Love worth having is love that chooses you for exactly who you are, not who someone else thinks you should be. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale, where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.